Ayanna Williams perched on a weathered wooden bench near the playground at Lincoln Park in Madison, Wisconsin. She tugged at her sweater sleeves, her fingers absent-mindedly fidgeting with the soft fabric. Her eyes darted between the children squealing with delight on the swings, and the vibrant leaves cartwheeling across the autumn breeze. Her mom had said she'd arrive in 10 minutes. But Ayanna didn't mind. The crisp air filled her lungs, and the quiet moments wrapped her in a rare cocoon of peace. A few yards away, Karen Whitfield adjusted the strap of her purse. Her gaze latched onto Ayanna, narrowing with suspicion. She had noticed the girl wander into the park alone about 20 minutes earlier. Whispers of unease curled in Karen's mind. Weaving a tapestry of assumptions, she didn't pause to unravel. "What's she doing here?" she muttered under her breath. Her steps quickened as she pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling slightly. Glancing around, as if seeking silent validation, she pressed the screen to her ear. Her voice sliced through the serene air. "Yes, I'd like to report someone suspicious in Lincoln Park," she declared, her tone sharp and resolute. "There's a young girl sitting alone. She's been here for a while, and I think someone should check it out." The words hung in the air like an unwelcome chill. Ayanna looked up, her thoughts disrupted by the intrusive sound. Her eyes locked briefly with Karen's, and she managed a polite, uncertain smile. But the unease began to creep in, tightening her chest. Karen didn't return the smile. Instead, she turned away, continuing her call with exaggerated gestures, her body language brimming with unwarranted conviction. Minutes trickled by, each one slower than the last. Ayanna tried to focus on the ambient noises of the park, the hum of traffic on the distant road, the laughter of families, the rhythmic crunch of joggers' feet against the gravel path. These familiar sounds, usually comforting, now felt like they came from another world. Karen's unrelenting gaze remained fixed on her, heavy and intrusive, as though it sought to weigh her down under its judgment. Then a jarring sound tore through the calm sirens. Ayanna's heart sank as she turned toward the park entrance. 2 police cruisers pulled in, their lights flashing ominously. The officers stepped out, their movements deliberate and measured. Karen waved them over, pointing toward Ayanna with the fervor of someone uncovering a great injustice. "There she is," Karen exclaimed, her voice triumphant. "I told you I don't think she belongs here." Ayanna's stomach twisted into knots. What had she done? She shifted on the bench, caught between the urge to stay put and the impulse to flee. Before she could decide, the officers approached, their expressions unreadable. "Excuse me, miss," one of them began, his voice firm yet steady. "Can we have a word with you?" Ayanna's voice wavered as she replied, "I'm just waiting for my mom. I didn't do anything wrong." The officer glanced back at Karen, who stood a few feet away, her arms crossed, her face painted with a mix of self-satisfaction and vindication. He sighed, motioning for Ayanna to remain seated. And in that moment, the truth struck Ayanna with cruel clarity. This wasn't about what she had done. It was about who Karen assumed she was. The sting of that realization burned deeper than any accusation. The officers towered over Ayanna, their presence casting long shadows on the sunlit ground. One flipped open a notebook with painstaking slowness, while the other adjusted his utility belt, his eyes darting between Ayanna's face and the surroundings. "What's your name, young lady?" the taller officer asked, his tone laced with an edge that demanded more than it should. "Ayanna," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Her hands gripped each other tightly in her lap, trying to anchor her against the storm of emotions rising within. "And what are you doing here?" His question was neutral in its phrasing, but carried an undertone that hinted her explanation might not suffice. "I'm waiting for my mom," Ayanna repeated, her voice firmer now. "She's on her way to pick me up." Karen interjected before the officer could respond, her voice rising again. "She's been sitting here for at least half an hour, just watching the playground. I don't know what her intentions are, but I thought it was better to be safe than sorry." Ayanna's jaw clenched, her patience eroding. "I wasn't watching the playground," she said, her tone sharp with frustration. "I was just sitting here, minding my business." The shorter officer glanced between Karen and Ayanna, then asked, "Do you have any ID?" Ayanna frowned, her confusion evident. "I'm 14. I don't carry ID." The taller officer exhaled, shifting his weight. "Do you have a phone? Can you call your mom?" Ayanna nodded, her hands trembling as she pulled out her phone. Dialing the familiar number, she waited as it rang twice. "Hey baby," Latasha Johnson's voice came through the speaker, calm and grounding. "Mom," Ayanna began, her voice cracking under the weight of her fear. "There are police here asking me questions. Can you come now?" There was a pause, followed by a sharp intake of breath. "I'm on my way," Latasha said, Her tone suddenly clipped and decisive. Don't move. Don't let them move you. The call ended, and Ayana lowered the phone. She's coming, she said softly. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. One stepped back, muttering into his radio, while the other remained rooted, his gaze flicking between Karen and the growing crowd of onlookers. Moments later, the sound of a car pulling up shattered the tension. A sleek black SUV came to a stop near the cruisers. The door opened, and Latasha Johnson stepped out, her every movement radiating authority. Mayor of Madison, Wisconsin, she was more than just Ayana's mother. She was a force to be reckoned with. The atmosphere hung heavy with tension, a suffocating silence blanketing the park as Latasha's words pierced through the crowd. Bias that could have cost my daughter her life, she declared, her voice unwavering, each syllable landing like a thunderclap. The officers froze, their postures stiffening as her gaze bore into them, a silent reckoning unfolding. The weight of her words pressed down, and for a moment, even the air seemed to still. The officers stepped back, visibly chastened. Latasha's eyes swept across them and Karen Whitfield, her tone cutting through the unease like a blade. Consider this your wake-up call, she said, her voice a blend of righteous fury and unyielding resolve. Then, her expression softened as she turned to Ayana. Let's go, sweetheart. Walking toward the SUV, Ayana felt a swirl of emotions. Relief that her mother had stood up for her, pride in Latasha's strength, and a simmering frustration that the confrontation had been necessary at all. The sting of what happened lingered like a fresh wound, impossible to ignore. But the echoes of that afternoon refused to stay confined to Lincoln Park. By the next morning, it was everywhere. Online, on the streets, and hushed conversations. Videos taken by stunned onlookers flooded social media, capturing every second of Mayor Latasha Johnson standing firm against police officers and Karen Whitfield. Hashtags like #LincolnParkIncident and #BiasAwareness trended relentlessly, sparking debates that spilled far beyond the city limits. At City Hall, reporters swarmed the steps, their voices a chaotic cacophony of shouted questions. Inside, Latasha's phone rang incessantly, a constant barrage of calls from supporters praising her courage, and critics questioning her motives. Accusations of overreaction buzzed around her like gnats. Yet Latasha remained poised, determined to confront the storm head-on. When she called for a press conference, the room overflowed. The tension was electric as she stepped to the podium, flanked by community leaders and Ayana, who stood quietly, her presence a powerful statement in itself. Yesterday was a stark reminder of the biases that persist in our society, Latasha began, her voice steady but brimming with emotion. My daughter Ayana was sitting in a park, simply enjoying her afternoon, when she became a target of suspicion. Because someone decided she didn't belong. She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle like a stone dropped into still water. The room was silent, save for the faint scribble of pens on notepads. Ayana shifted slightly, acutely aware of the room's collective gaze. Her mother's voice grew firmer, each word a deliberate hammer blow. This isn't an isolated incident. It's a pattern, one that countless individuals endure every day. But yesterday, it happened to my daughter. And I refused to let it go unnoticed. The crowd hung on her every word. We can't afford to ignore the damage these biases inflict, not just on individuals, but on the very fabric of our community. That's why today, I'm announcing comprehensive anti-bias training for all city employees, including our police force. This isn't a perfect solution, but it's a critical step toward building a more inclusive and just city. Applause broke out, tentative at first, then swelling. Still, whispers of dissent rippled through the crowd. A reporter raised her hand. Mayor Johnson, do you believe this training will prevent incidents like this in the future? Latasha met the question head-on. Training alone won't erase centuries of systemic inequality, she said, her tone resolute. But it's a start. What matters is our commitment to this work. Not just when incidents like this grab headlines, but every single day. Meanwhile, Karen Whitfield's name trended online for all the wrong reasons. Friends and neighbors confronted her, their questions laced with disbelief and anger. Her public apology, though immediate, felt hollow to many, and while she kept a low profile, whispers of her actions followed her like a shadow. For Ayana, returning to school was a mix of apprehension and determination. The incident had thrust her into the spotlight, her peers looking at her with a mixture of curiosity and newfound respect. In class, her history teacher, Mr. Daniels, broke the uneasy silence. Ayana, he said gently, if you're comfortable, would you like to share your perspective? I think we all have something to learn from your experience. Her heart pounded as she glanced around the room, then took a deep breath. I didn't ask for this to happen, she began, her voice steady yet tinged with emotion. But it did. And it made me realize how often people like me have to prove we belong. That's not fair. And it's not right. The room fell silent, her words resonating deeply. Ayana had always been reserved, but now her voice carried a strength that couldn't be ignored. As weeks turned into months, Latasha's anti-bias initiative took root. Workshops, personal bias assessments, and community forums began reshaping conversations across Madison. At one forum, Ayana found herself nervously stepping forward, her hands trembling as she spoke. I didn't think this could happen to me, she admitted. But it did. And no one, should have to feel the way I did that day. The room erupted in applause. And though Karen Whitfield remained a shadowy figure, she quietly began attending these forums, sitting unnoticed in the back, perhaps beginning her own journey of reckoning. The changes in Madison were subtle at first but undeniable. Officers began engaging with the community beyond their uniforms. Schools incorporated lessons on implicit bias. And Ayana, encouraged by her peers, joined the debate team, finding her voice in new and powerful ways. One evening, as Ayana and Latasha sat together at home, Latasha looked at her daughter with unmasked pride. I always knew you had a voice, she said softly. I just didn't know the world would hear it so soon. Ayana smiled, leaning against her mother. I just want things to get better, she whispered. For everyone. They will, Latasha said, pulling her close. Because of people like you. When the mural on the Lincoln Community Center was unveiled, a vibrant depiction of unity, hope and justice, Ayana stood beside her mother, a quiet yet undeniable leader. She hadn't asked to be a symbol of change, but she embraced the role with grace, knowing her story was just one thread in a much larger tapestry of progress. As the applause echoed around her, Ayana felt the weight of what had been, and the promise of what could be. Together, they had sparked something. A fire that would continue to burn, fueled by resilience, hope, and the collective will to be better.